All right, we can start. I was thinking everyone's going to come late, but you all came early, so I am questioning your Sephardic heritage already, but thank you all for showing up. I know when it rains in Los Angeles, everybody stays home, so it's really a wonderful sign that you all came out because you're in for a good treat tonight. Um, Rabbi Joseph Dweck, who it's really hard not to call you Joey,
You can call me John.
um, is a child of this community. He grew up here. I used to play when he was a little kid, and in the days when we would all be under the governorship of his grandpa Joe Fallis at Magen David on Melrose, where we all learned the right tunes, and um, and I remember you sitting Shabbat afternoons next to your grandfather, getting the tutelage of how to sing and how to chant. And now he ends up with the Spanish and Portuguese, who are far, far away from the Syrian tunes. But he is the senior rabbi now of the Spanish and Portuguese community in the UK, which encompasses a number of synagogues. I'm going to read you a little bit of his background. He's uh, not only the senior rabbi of that community, a community which was once led by one very revered Chacham Gaon, who many of you may have remembered. Um, he is also the head of a Bet Midrash, much of online classes called thehabura.com, Habura, if you want to check it out and join, and we're going to be spreading that information through the SEC as well. He studied in Jerusalem at Yeshiva Chazon Ovadia under the tutelage of the former chief rabbi, Ovadia Yosef, who is actually now was his wife's grandfather. He has a master's degree in Jewish education, currently working toward a master's in psychotherapy, because all of us Sephardics have psychological problems for sure. And he also, as senior rabbi, oversees the Sephardic Bet Din and the Sephardic Kashrut Authority. He's the deputy president of the London School of Jewish Studies, president of the Council of Christians and Jews, an ecclesiastical authority to the Board of Deputies of British Jews. And he is a member of the Standing Committee of the Conference of European Rabbis. And I encourage you to look online at seniorrabbi.com because there's all kinds of history and interesting facts about the community that he leads. It's not just one synagogue, it's a number of synagogues, and he goes visiting from one to another, top hat in hand. And just before we get started, and at the end of our program, we're going to have a little bit of a Q&A and discussion with Rabbi Buskila and Rabbi Dweck. There aren't too many people in the world who have the classical Sephardic philosophy and approach to Judaism, especially in the rabbinic world. And two of them are here tonight. And we hope that we spread this message, which is a message of modern thinking, our classical traditions, middle of the road, and non-extremism. Before Rabbi Dweck is going to speak, just so he feels like he has to do an excellent job tonight, I want to present something on behalf of the SEC for you to take back. And I know you're traveling. He's going to Seattle as a scholar in residence to our sister community this weekend, but I arranged for you to wrap it up and take it. I just want to show it. So this is our signature SEC limited edition poster that we have. I have one in my home. I love it, and I hope you will too. You'll get to frame it as you like it when you get home. But we have a box for you to roll it and scroll it and put it under your arm. And
Thank you so much. That's beautiful.
Enjoy that at home.
That's bold to give it before the talk.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
But thank you. Thank you.
All right, so Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Rabbi Joseph Dweck.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Neil. I'm going to give a personal recollection. I spoke to Neil about it earlier today. As he says, I am certainly a child of this community, and I grew up at Magen David on Melrose with my grandfather and my uncles and the community. And I have a very distinct memory of, all right, here, yes? Better? Yeah. I have a very distinct memory of sitting on his lap, on Neil's lap, during the reading of the Torah, following the Aliyot. And so I remember your hands. I was only 6 or 7 years old, but no. All right. But I remember, of course, growing up and being a young child, and of course this synagogue. And so I'm very grateful to be able to come back and to share some words and thoughts with you. And I'm grateful because I know that on a Tuesday night, at 8 o'clock, it's not easy necessarily to get out, and I very much appreciate your presence. I believe, and I've said, I spoke to 2 high schools. I spoke at Eula, my alma mater, and at Shalhevet this morning. And I said to the students, and I say to you, the most important and the most valuable thing that I believe that anyone can give anyone today is attention. It is at a high premium. And so I am very grateful, and I do not take it lightly, that you come to whatever degree you can with your attention. I also, before I begin, I want to acknowledge that Rabbanit Chana Henkin is with us. Rabbanit Henkin, it's a great honor that she is here with us this evening. I am personally very humbled that she is here. She is the head of Nishmat Seminary in Yerushalayim. And that seminary is where my daughter Sarah studied. And I am very grateful to her and to the teachers of Nishmat for teaching not only Torah to my daughter. I can't speak closer. This is the best that I could do. How's that? Are we good? Okay, should I repeat that? I'm not going to. But I'm going to say again, I'm grateful that the Rabbanit is here, and I'm grateful for her leadership, because she is educating the women of the future and of today to teach, to mentor, and to mold young women, and for that matter, the whole of Klal Yisrael, in very strong wisdom and leadership. And really, there are very few others in the world that is doing what it is that she is doing and what her seminary is doing. I'm very grateful. Really, it is a tremendous honor that you're here, Rabbanit. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge, of course, Rabbi Buskila, a dear friend, a tremendous Talmid Chacham. And as we said, afterwards, we'll sit in dialogue and answer questions. The social contract, which is important this evening for my specific talk, is 45 minutes. So I will end at that point, which I'm seeing now is about 40, right? 22, 9. And then Rabbi Buskila and I will answer some questions, and that will be our evening. So I begin. The title for the talk this evening is The Essential Sephardic Ethos, what it is that the Sephardim can contribute to Judaism in the 21st century. Now, some preemptive points. This is my opinion as to what it is I think the Sephardim can contribute to Judaism in the 21st century. That's all I can offer you. And in addition to that, I say anytime that I speak about the Sephardim particularly, I want to make very clear that I am not disparaging any other sect or group of Judaism. I say simply what it is that I understand ourselves to be, but I acknowledge that our people from the very, very beginning are multifaceted. We are of many colors, and we need every single one. And every one contributes something different. And all that I wish to share with you this evening is what it is that I know about the Sephardim, Again, it is not exhaustive and it is not all-inclusive. It's what I know about the Sephardim and why I believe that there is something very special that the Sephardim can contribute to Judaism today. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'hakol nהיה b'dbaro. So I start with some basics. At the heart of Judaism, before we talk about Sephardic Judaism, it's important just to be able to orient ourselves to what it is that we're talking about when we speak about Judaism. At the core of Judaism is one thing only, and that is covenant. It is covenant between God and Abraham. Without that, there's really nothing to speak of as far as Judaism is concerned. Everything that we know about Judaism stems from that interaction. So whatever ancillary circles, right, may end up emanating out, start there. It's covenant. That is the belief of our people, and it has been the belief of our people for 4,000 years. Which, when I say 4,000 years, we hear the number, it's not easy to be able to absorb the number. 4,000 years is a heck of a long time. But that's how our people have believed for a very long time. And it has been at the heart of who it is that we are. And some things about the name, why do I go back to Abraham? Not just because it's the origin, but there are certain things to be able to recognize about the nature of that covenant. We read about it in our source text, the Torah, which has also been with us for at least 3,000 years, more or less. It's the one thing that has stayed with us throughout all of our sojourns in everywhere that we've been, and there are practically no places on the planet that we have not been during that time. So with Abraham, the way that the story is presented is that God falls in love with Abraham. No reasons are given. We have Mesorah, we have tradition as to why it might have been that God fell in love with Abraham. But when you read the story as it's presented in the Torah, God falls in love with Abraham. Now you can ask, does God fall in love? Well, if you ask that question, you can also ask very simply, does God love? Period. Well, we speak about him loving. So I'm not going to get into the theological questions as to how does God love tonight. That's not for tonight. We don't have the time. But I know one thing, and I'm a Maimonidean, which means that I follow Maimonides primarily in my philosophy about Judaism. I follow the Rambam. And the Rambam would say, well, God doesn't love like you think he does, and so on and so forth, and go through a whole... But for tonight, for us right now, we're going to say that God loves the same way that Torah says God loves. Because that's what Torah says. Torah says God loves. And we're expected to take that at face value. We can deal with the theological issues of that another time, another lecture. Maybe we'll come back for that one. God loves. And if God loves, God falls in love. Because that's part of loving. And what you know, if you've ever been in love, you don't have to answer now. You can keep that to yourself. If you've ever been in love, you know that once you start to give reasons for it, you fail. Once you start to pull that apart and say, well, this is why. Come on. You can't fill a book, not 10 books, with why. It just happens. And that is how it's presented. Astonishingly, that's how it's presented. So we don't ask questions. It's unconditional. It wasn't begun by condition, and therefore it is love that is unconditional. And God presents a dedicated covenant to Abraham from the very beginning. And he says, look, Abe, you and me, what say you? And Abraham says, Amen. And the rest, as they say, is history. Unconditional covenant. Now, what happens as a result of that? God says to Abraham, it's you and your ... Now, this is very important. What's filling in the dots? You, Abraham, and covenant with you and not your students, You might think that God would say, listen, Abraham, I love your philosophy. I really do. I think you're a great thinker. We're going to go with your school. You and the people who think like you. Except that's not what God says. Instead, what God says is you and your kids, Abraham. Your children. You, your son Isaac, his son Jacob. That's how I'm going. So it's something about family. So another element of the covenant is to recognize that the core element of the Jewish people is not philosophical. It is familial. Right? Now, people think that Judaism is about philosophy, and it is. But it is not primarily so. Primarily, it is about a family. You and me and all of the other Jews in the world. We are a national family. And that, my dear friends, is the core bedrock. It is the foundation stone of our people. We are not primarily a religion. We are not primarily a philosophy. We are primarily a family. And everything else that we are, the religious aspects, the philosophical aspects, all of the ideas that we have brought to this world, and we have brought our share of ideas to this world. All of the ideas are overlays. They are overlays on that core point. Abraham and God and the kids. Now, what are the implications of that? The implications of that are, at its core, we recognize that we are family. Now, here's the hard truth about family. You don't always like your family. As they say, you can't choose your family. They just are. And oftentimes, it doesn't really matter whether you like them or not, because if there was an issue, you'd probably be on the next plane over to wherever it is that they are, that you need to be there with them. You'd be there with them. You may not talk to them very often, but there you go. It's not friends, it's family. And there are points in family where you have parts of the family that really just can't stand each other. As a matter of fact, they could vehemently disagree with each other. But you cannot break that they are family. As a matter of fact, it's part of the problem, isn't it? So that's us. That's the first point. Why do I say that to you? Not just because it's at the core, because to understand the Sephardim, we must understand that point, I believe. Because I believe that for the Sephardim, that point has always been at the heart of our people, of our way in Judaism. Because we've understood that the religious aspect and the philosophical aspect, the mind and the heart, are overlays over the fact that we are a family. And because of that, the Sephardim have traditionally and historically been, and forgive the term, a very broad church. The Sephardim traditionally and historically have not had factions religiously, because we have not categorized ourselves religiously. We have recognized that we are a family, and sometimes members of the family do things that we either like, don't like, approve of, don't approve of, and so on and so forth, but they're family nonetheless, and we're not slamming the door on their face. And there are certain points where the family just comes together when they need to come together. So the community was that. So I am the senior rabbi today of the Spanish and Portuguese community in the UK. It's the oldest Jewish community in the country. It's been there since 1656. We've been running for over 350 years. Significant. As far as Jewish history is concerned, it's really not a long time. When you measure that against 3,000 years, all right. Why do I say that to you? Because the way that the Spanish and Portuguese community has run for that 3 centuries is in the manner that I am explaining to you. There has always been a standard religiously. As you overlay religion onto the family, and there's a standard. What has been our standard? We follow the Talmud. The laws as established in the Talmud and the Gemara. interpreted mainly by Maimonides. And then after him, 500 years later, the Shulchan Aruch Rabbeinu Yosef Karo, who we call simply Maran, which means our master, our teacher. That's how we run. You want to get married, you do it our way. You want to get divorced, you do it our way. You want to convert, you do it our way. You want the service, the order of service, how we pray, you do it our way. What you do at home, look, it's not my business. But when you do your Jewish things in terms of the Jewish laws, the laws are as we've had them for quite some time. And that is why in the Sephardic tradition, there are many people that are not observant, right? They don't observe. And what I mean by that, they don't observe. They observe some, they observe a little, they observe a lot, whatever the case may be. But they consider themselves Orthodox. They drive to synagogue on Shabbat, they do whatever it is, whatever, but they're Orthodox. Why? Because when they get married in the Orthodox way. That's very Sephardic. Interestingly, it's also very British. Because the majority of the Jewish community in Britain, this is both Sephardim and Ashkenazim, and this is just my empirical opinion, which I'll share with you in a moment when I tell you the way that it is. In Britain, the Ashkenazim as well run that way. They've done that for almost as long as we've been there. They came 100 years later, so we're the establishment. Sephardim are the establishment. We were also quite prejudiced. Has anybody visited Bevis Marks? Has anybody visited Bevis Marks? So in Bevis Marks, which is the oldest synagogue, the oldest continuously used synagogue in the world. It's the oldest synagogue still running continuously in Europe, that's for sure. Opened in 1701 by my predecessor, Hacham David Nieto. It was tremendous Talmid Hacham. But the Ashkenazim that prayed there, they weren't allowed to sit in the main pews. They made them sit in the back. It was a problem. And that ran for some time until Sir Moses Montefiore wanted to change that. Sir Moses Montefiore was the president of the Kahal, right? I don't have to tell you who he was. Look it up if you don't know. And what he did, he was exorbitantly wealthy. And he offered a double dowry to any member of the community, of the Sephardi community who married an Ashkenazi. And the reason he did that was because he felt that the community needed to connect. So he encouraged that financially. So the Sephardim, we have always had, as I said, I was saying to you why the Ashkenazim ultimately ended up running that way. The Ashkenazim ran that way because that's how the Sephardim were doing it. We started it. So the same thing, observant, less observant, more observant, Orthodox. And that is quite humanistic, it's pragmatic, but at its core, philosophically, what it is recognizing that we are a family. And that is the bedrock, foundation stone of who we are. And we forget that because we get stuck on the overlays rather than that core point. And that is why that when the Torah says you love your neighbor as yourself, and we're talking about our people, right? We can argue about whether it extends to everybody else and how it does, but that in the Torah it's speaking to us about our people. I'm sorry to say, it's the reality. That's how we've always seen it. It's not an asterisk there. It's you love the people. You love the family. So when we understand that, when we recognize that that is at the core, that is not to say, and this is very important, that is not to say that the overlays are not important. They are. Because why would we strip the family down to the bare essentials? The family has so many layers, so many beautiful layers. And one of those layers, right, one of the aspects of those layers is what happened at Sinai. So in our tradition, we believe that our people stood at the foot of Sinai and received the Torah from God. That's another cornerstone foundation of the Jewish people. Whether you believe it, you don't believe it, you accept the historicity of it or you don't, that's your thing, but you can't disregard it. You can explain it away, but it's there. That's part of the Jewish people. And the Torah, we recognize, we call it the Sefer HaBrit. It's the book of the covenant. Which means that this now presents to us the family of Abraham Avinu, right? The only reason Moses is hired by God is because he made a promise to Abraham. It says it explicitly. Moses, the only reason he got the job is because I promised Abraham. So I need you to do something for me because I told Abraham that I was going to give him some land, and I'm ready to do it now because we were just sweeping it up and getting it ready for them, and that we needed to hold them for a bit. And I also wanted them to appreciate freedom, so I put them into slavery. And I need you to get them out of that land and into this land. That's Moses' job at the beginning, right? Interestingly, and this is another thing to recognize, through all of God's dialogue to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, as presented in the Torah, not once does God tell them about a Torah. He never says, Abraham, I've got this phenomenal text for you. You're going to love this book. The whole reason really I want to do this with you is because I want you to read my book. And none of it. It's not discussed. It's not even mentioned. There's a hint by Abraham where God says, Abraham, he's going to tell his kids to follow my rule. That's all it says. It doesn't tell Abraham, this is why I'm doing this. I want to give you nothing. Even when he hires Moshe at the Sinai, at the burning bush, he doesn't say, Moses, I want you to take the people out of Egypt because I want to give them this book. He doesn't say it. Again, it's a slight hint. He goes, you'll bring them out, ta'avdunoti ala harazeh. You'll bring them out, you're going to serve me at this mountain. That's going to be a pit stop. I've got something. Why do I say this to you? Because it's important to recognize this, to contextualize the suggestion that I'm putting forth to you, that we are fundamentally a nation of a family that needs a home on the planet. And so God's going to give you a home on the planet. I got a nice strip of land, Mediterranean. It's got beautiful skiing up at the north. It's going to be, you'll like it. So what is Torah then? Torah, we talk about Torah in our prayers. How do we talk about the Torah? Kihem hayenu ve'orech yamenu. It is our life, the length of our days. Yes, it is. Absolutely it is. Why? Because if I recognize that my life on this world as a Jewish person is primarily one of covenant with God, the Torah is a framework for that covenant. It's God saying, look, I'm God. I have nothing really qualitatively in common with you. That's the Jewish belief. God is not physical, right? Gets into the Maimonidean things again. And if you were left to your own devices, you wouldn't really have a way to know how to connect with me. So I'm going to tell you how you can connect with me. And through that, we can maintain relationship and connection. That's what a mitzvah is. That's what a commandment is. That's all that a commandment is. It's giving us opportunities to be able to connect within that framework. This is not global. This is not we wish everybody was doing our commandments. Nothing of the sort. That's why we never had real proselytizing in Judaism. We're not interested in everybody doing our little covenant. It's our covenant with God. And the reality is, that book that we call the Torah, it really is pretty astonishing that people started to like it and read it. It's a little book for a small Hebrew tribe in a strip of land in the Middle East. And that book should all of a sudden become so influential in the entire Western world, and you got people talking about the Ten Commandments as though these are meaningful things for everybody. Who said? It's ours. With Him. It's this thing we've got going on with God. But it is important to us, it is of utmost importance to us, and it is not an exaggeration to say, Kihem hayenu ve'orech yamenu, it is our life and the length of our days, because it's the context of the entire nature of what it is to be a Jew on this world. And make no mistake, whether you observe or not, your entire mindset, if you have any relationship to being Jewish, was wrought in that book. Because you don't know what you know. Neither did Leonard Bernstein or half of the writers in Hollywood and so on and so forth. What do you think? Jewish humor comes from where? Not the Talmud? Have you ever studied the Talmud? It's replete with Jewish humor. Jewish humor starts in the Bible itself. The Jews come out of Egypt. They're sitting by the sea. Pharaoh is riding in back of them. They're at sudden death. Moses is standing there, doesn't know what to do. And what do the people say to Moses? They don't say, Moses, how could you? They say, what's the matter? There's not enough graves in Egypt. You got to bring us here to die in the middle of the dead in the sand. That's how they talk. That's how they think. This is what they do. Not enough graves in Egypt. They're going to die in 2 minutes from Paro, but they're being cynical about how many graves there are in Egypt. That's great. This is us. This is the way that it's in that book. So of course, and of course we have risked our lives over the last 3,000 years for it. We have died. Countless numbers of our people have died to speak those words and live those commandments. Do not forget that. Make no mistake. That's just context. So for the next 20 minutes, I want to bring it to our current situation. So when we recognize that we are talking about a family, a national family, that has been running for 4,000 years from the time of Abraham, that has a national text that is the context of the covenant that our people have had with God for that time, that is the life of our people, the length of our days. How do the Sephardim relate to that? So I'm going to present you with a philosophical aspect, an overlay, right? How do the Sephardim relate to it? And the Sephardim, when we talk about classical Sephardi, I've coined that term to a certain degree because not all Sephardim are the same, contrary to popular belief. When I speak to you about the Sephardim, I'm talking to you about a Sephardi ethos that is rooted in Maimonides and earlier, and his line. And I'm not going to get into tonight why. I'm simply putting that forth. You can look at the Chabura, as Neil said, and you can hear a whole bunch expounded on that. You can look at my website and have all of that. I'm simply saying that to you. So I want to teach you a piece of Maimonides. This is something that the Rambam writes in the Moreh Nebuchim, in the Guide to the Perplexed. The scene that the Rambam is dealing with in this particular portion of the Guide to the Perplexed is during the debacle of the golden calf. So God sees that the people have done the golden calf. He is not pleased, to say the least. He's not pleased. Moses' job, as he was hired to do, right, it kicks in here because God's very upset, doesn't really want to continue with the people. Moses says, God, look, it's going to be a really bad PR move if you do anything to the people at this point. What is Egypt going to say? Can you imagine what the papers are going to say tomorrow? Literally, this is what, it doesn't say the papers, but literally, that's what Moshe says to God. He says, imagine what they're going to say, that you couldn't handle them. You took them into the desert to die, and you couldn't manage the plan. It's not a good look. So God says to Moses, he goes, so what do you suggest? He said, look, I think you have to tolerate this. You can punish, that's okay. Punishments are allowed. You can discipline, but we have to continue. And so Moshe says, Halo belechticha imanu. You must walk with us, even when we are not doing what it is that you want us to do. And God says, fine, okay. I will walk with you, even in your mess. And then Moses does this. He sees an opportunity. He recognizes that God has acquiesced. And Moses says to him, recognize your people, this nation is your people. And God says, I will do that, Moses. That too. And then Moses says, Lord, show me your ways. He takes an opportunity. He notices that God has softened. There is a window here. And he says, God, hodi'ani na dirachecha. Please show me your ways. Ve'eda'acha. And I will know you. Show me your ways. Ve'eda'acha. So God says to him, okay. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Moses. Ani a'avir kol tuvi al panecha. I'm going to pass before you, Moses, all of my good. Those are my ways, and you will know me. It's a bit of an anomaly. How do we deal with that? How do we explain that? So Harambam explains it. This is his approach to this whole episode that I just told you. What is Moses asking when he asks God for his ways, to know his ways so that he can know him? And what is God's response when he says, I'm going to pass all of my good before you? Says Maimonides, says Harambam, what Moses was asking was, God, I recognize that I cannot know you as you are in your own existence. I don't have the apparatus to be able to do that. God says to him, Lo yir'ani ha'adam v'hai, a human being really can't see me as you wish to see me. So Moses says, then I want to know about your output. I want to know your ways, what it is you do. I want you to show me you in that way. So an analogy to this is, imagine an artist that you like. And when I say artist, I don't just mean painter, I mean any artist. Author, singer, musician, painter, whatever it is. Imagine one that you really like. Now, if you met them in person, that's a bonus. But you don't necessarily have had to have met the most favorite author, writer, musician in person to feel that you know them. You know them because of their creative output, how they have expressed themselves in the world, that you have been hit by, you have seen, and not only have you seen, you've been impacted by, and to some degree you love this person because of what it is that they put out in the world. And so you know them. And what Moshe was asking God was, I want to see your creative output. I want to know it in a full, and I want your complete works. So that I can know you. Ve'eda'acha, he says, so that I can know you. And God says, that I can do. Ani a'avir kol tuvi al panecha. I'm going to present you my entire portfolio. Kol tuvi. Says Harambam. What is kol tuvi? Listen to this beautiful Perush of Harambam. He says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed him every detail of creation and its interconnection with every other detail, which essentially is the matrix of creation. How does Harambam know this? Very simple. It says at the end of Genesis, at the end of Bereshit, Vayar Elohim et kol asher asa. God saw kol, all that he had made. Ve'ine tov meod. Kol tov. Kol asher asa tov meod. That's kol tuvi. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ani avir kol tuvi lefanecha, all of my good, it's all that God made was very good. That's the entirety of creation. That's Harambam's explanation. Beautiful, simple, clear. And that is what Moshe sees. Now, why do I share this bit of Harambam with you? Because how do we know God? What do we learn from that? How does one come to know God? From studying his world. And on that, I will say to you this. Within the Jewish people, not to be binary about it, but we do it all the time, there are two kinds. There are two ways people look at the world. We either look at the world as an elaborate distraction that we are challenged to keep away from and focus on what matters. Maybe it's Torah, maybe it's mitzvot, maybe it's Jewish law, whatever it is. Jewish philosophy, whatever it is. But don't get distracted by the world. Are you with me? You hear what I'm saying, yeah? There's another way of looking at the world. And that is that the world is not an elaborate distraction made by God, but an elaborate expression of God. And it is only through that that we come to know Him. Torah provides us a framework for understanding it, for thinking through it. But to see the face of God, there is only one way: to look at His creative output and understand it in the best way that you can. And that means that the world is not a place for us to challenge ourselves to keep from, but rather to dive into and be a part of. Now, I will caution and caveat and say, in this world, there are toxins. There are things that human beings do not thrive by interacting with, like arsenic and things like that. Now, there are different levels of toxins. There are physical toxins, there are mental toxins, there are spiritual toxins, there are toxins. And we, as big boys and girls, can understand that as important as it is for us to understand what is and what is not a toxin, it is important for us to recognize that the world has them and that we navigate accordingly. But that is not a reason not to engage in the world. You be as careful as you can. And that's one of the reasons why the Torah is very valuable and beneficial to us, because it guides us in terms of living and thriving in this world, which is why Torah says to us, V'hai bahem. You follow this framework, your family and me, we run through this framework together, and you will thrive. And I will stop here and say to you, if you question that, recognize that you and I should not be sitting here tonight. I don't mean here in the synagogue, I mean on the planet. There is absolutely no reason why any one of us should ever have expected that our people should run as a unique people, self-aware people, for the thousands of years that we have. We should be an exhibit in a museum. The reality is we shouldn't even be an exhibit in the museum, because in any situation that we found ourselves, we were insignificant. Do you hear what I'm saying? This is important. If you question for 1 minute that living a life with the Torah at our center is not a framework for thriving in this world, look around you and think again. It's staring you literally in the face. We take for granted that we are Jews alive today, thinking of ourselves as Jews, questioning ourselves as Jews, questioning Israel and its place in the world and so on. Israel, what are you talking about? Could you imagine if you had to tell your great-grandparents that there are problems in Israel? They would say, what is that? What is Israel? No, I mean, look, there's the government and Bibi and I don't know, there's a whole thing with the Supreme. There's a court? What is that? Is that like by British mandate or? No, it's ours, it's ours. It's ours. And we have problems? Yeah, okay, so that is not to minimize. Make no mistake, that is not to minimize that we should care about what's going on in the Israeli government, and I am certainly not presenting any opinion on that tonight. I am simply saying, let us not forget the broad, all-encompassing reality of the miracle of the fact that we are here. That is there. And it is not just not to be expected, it is an aberration of social history. So yes, it is our life and the length of our days, the Torah. And as far as the Sephardim are concerned, the Torah is a guide to the elaborate expression of the world that is God's creative output to all of us. And that the way to know Him, as far as we are concerned, and have always been concerned, this is the Sephardi approach from the very beginning. The way that we come to know Him is to study and immerse ourselves in His world. We avoid the toxins as best we can, but it is the only way to see his face. And what that means is not just studying science, because sometimes I say that and say, well, Rabbi, I mean, obviously, you can study science and math, but do we have to read literature? Well, I ask you then, who created the individuals who write that literature? Not God? Yeah, but there's some real vile people. Well, isn't that interesting that those are also part of God's world? I wonder what that's about. It's studying his world. It's recognizing that we are a national family. And if it is true that studying his world is the way to know him, we cannot do it superficially or haphazardly. And that brings me to the 21st century. If the ethos of the Sephardim is to immerse ourselves in the world through the framework of Torah, to understand it as best we can, not in superficial ways and not in, parochial ways, but to get in it, to really understand it, well, then we've got our work cut out for us, don't we? Because it means that when we read of what it is that is happening in our world, in society, with humanity, whether we like it or not, we believe that it is powered by God. And we've got to figure out how it is that we respond through the framework of our Torah. As far as the Sephardim are concerned, the eternity of Torah is not following by blind faith for all time. The eternity of Torah is a demanding challenge of the covenant to question the major signals of contemporary times and how they are incorporated into the framework of Torah that we know. Well, that's a big challenge, which is why we need our Hachamim to be of high caliber, not just in Torah, but in understanding the world. And yes, I will admit to you, today's world is complex, to say the least. But we do not say, it's all crazy. Let's hunker down and keep into our focus. That the Sephardim have never said. We have always said we need to be able to understand it, and we need to be able to see it through the framework of our Torah and recognize how it is that it's incorporated, because it comes from only one source, and that's him. Are you with me? So, what do we contribute? We contribute leaning in to society and the world, not hunkering down and barricading the door away from it. But we also contribute doing so with a framework of Torah, as I've been saying over and over. And this is something for the last 5 minutes that I want to point out that the Sephardim have done, that we ourselves as Sephardim have failed. We've lost our way. And what way is that? So as I said, in general, the Jewish people don't know what they know, because, we are wrought in the Talmud. Our entire psyche, our national psyche is wrought in the Talmud. But what the Sephardim understood, and this was halakha, this was not just a custom, this was halakha, this is Rambam posek lahalakha. How do we engage with imbuing Torah into our people? We start from the time that they can speak, which is about 2 years old, give or take. And the child is to learn Pesukim, verses of the Torah. You teach them Pesukim. As a matter of fact, interestingly, except for the first two, which I'll come to in a moment, there's no specific order. You just fill them with Pesukim, as much as they can take, and just keep going. And just repeat it over and over. Just repeat the Pesukim. Which is very clear that this is not an academic endeavor. Because if it was an academic endeavor, we would need them to have cognitive understanding of the developments of the ideas and understand the stories and order and so on, and we care nothing about that. We only care about one thing, that the words should be in them. That is an unconscious education. Yeah? It is filling the unconscious of the psyche. It's not a conscious thing. But it begins to mold the spirit of a Jewish person, to which the words of the book of the covenant live inside them, in their psyche. And that is how we have always taught for hundreds of years. And this is a place where the Ashkenazim have diverged. They have left that, because that's how everybody did it, until the Tosafot. The Tosafot said, you don't have to do that anymore. You can just study the Talmud, because everything's in the Talmud. Balul, he makes a play on the Bavli, because it's Talmud Bavli, says Balul hu, it includes everything. And even there were many Ashkenazim who rejected that. The Bach rejected it, later the Maharal rejected it, people rejected it afterwards. But the Sephardim, we never changed. That's how we taught. And it's not academic. It's a question of what do you embed in the unconscious of the human mind? What is the wiring of a Jewish brain? The Bible. That's what. The words of the Torah. And that is enough to be able to see the world through the eyes of covenant and family. That's enough. Certain things simply become evident without us even realizing that they are evident, not really even realizing why it is that we see the world that we do, but here it is. And I will say to you that we've lost that, and it is a tragic and terrible loss, because we are working from another framework. And then we wonder why it is that we have this trouble navigating the world as Jewish people. We have trouble because we don't have the Jewish psyche that is able to navigate it. It may be extreme what it is that I'm saying to you, but I'm telling you that historically this is the way that we've done it for hundreds of years. So it worked, because we're here again. The contribution of the Sephardim to the Jewish world, and to, I believe, the 21st century is, if we teach as we used to, if we give our children what is rightfully theirs, it is their inheritance, morasha, right? That's the second pasuk the first pasuk that you're supposed to teach a child. There's a halakha. The halakha is the first two pasukim have to be specific. After that, you can teach them. What are they? The first pasuk, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, morasha keilat Yaakov. Moshe commanded us a Torah. It is an inheritance. Inheritance means that it is rightfully ours. Rabbi Meir Mazuz, who's the Rosh Yeshiva of Kisei Rahamim, you should live and be well, he said, if we don't give that to our children, we're thieves. Why? Because we are stealing from them something that is rightfully theirs. Is there something more basic for a Jewish person than the Bible? And not from a religious perspective. From a family perspective. It's our book. It's our book. This is the family's book. Don't they deserve what they do with it afterwards? That's not your business. Just give them the book. It belongs to them. The Sephardim have always done that. We've dropped it, but that's how we've always done it. That provides a framework to see the world through those eyes, the eyes of the covenant between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as I said at the beginning, that is the foundation stone of our people. Everything else is an overlay. And finally, when we recognize that we follow Maimonides' point, that to know God is to dive into His world and study it and understand it. We recognize that the world is not a place for us to cower away from, no matter how complex and difficult it gets, but to strive to understand it in the best way that we possibly can, and to immerse our lives into it. And if we can do that, as leaders, if we can open our hearts to that as the general population, if we can encourage these kinds of rabbis, these kinds of students, this kind of curriculum, if we can encourage that and recognize it, and not just do it as apologetics, but do it with pride, that this is how we have done it for at least 1,000 years, we will do our people a service. We will strengthen our people and our nation and our family. And that is what I believe the Sephardim can contribute. Thank you.
That was have the sponge absorb all that. Uh, I wanted to thank also Sephardic Temple for co-hosting this event. I'm sorry Rabbi Cohen had to leave, but I did want to acknowledge him. And of course, Hazan Mizrahi is here, so very, very nice to see you. And in Ladino, we say, Bendicha madre que parió este hijo. Blessed mother who gave birth. So Joey's mother, Rabbi Dweck's mother, is here, Sarah. Thank you. Blessed mother who gave birth to this boy, as well as grandparents, uncle, a lot of family. I want to invite Rabbi Buskila up, and we'll have some questions and discussion. And if anyone wants to start it off, we can include any of your comments or questions. Just speak up loudly, stand and speak up.
Thank you.
I have a philosophical question for Rabbi and a practical question. So my first question, you mentioned proselytizing and entering the way. Another sect, the Lubavitch, back in the 90s, they got that House of Representatives, passed some kind of resolution in the House that the Noahide laws were the foundation for civilization. I know that they have an outreach program with the name Noah, try to get non-Jews to observe the Noahide laws. I was curious philosophically, is there a Sephardic take on the B'nai Noah movement? Is it off our radar?
So the question is, do the Sephardim have an approach to the Noahide laws for the entire world, and how that works as Chabad does? It seems a little bit of proselytizing. Your take.
Yeah, Rabbi Buskila. Careful. No. All right.
Thank you. I want to first, before I answer your question, really compliment and congratulate Rabbi Dweck on a magnificent and brilliant lecture tonight. More than a lecture, it really came to the heart. It was really Dvarim hayotzim min halev, things that came from his heart and really entered our heart. It was really beautiful, and I must say that this is a very charmed evening for me tonight, because I'm thrilled, at least for tonight here in Los Angeles, to not be a lone ranger when it comes to these things, and to have another Sephardic rabbi who speaks this language and speaks this way in Kenya. I wish there were many more. To answer your question about, so in keeping in line with Rabbi Dweck spoke about Maimonides and the Rambam. So you know, the Rambam's texts, his main halachic, legal, and philosophic work, it's a blend of halacha and philosophy, is the Mishneh Torah. That book actually, like the Talmud itself, was censored by the church because there were things that weren't very complementary to Catholicism, Christianity, Islam. So we now have the restored, complete editions of the Rambam of the Mishneh Torah. And at the very end, the Rambam asks the question, why is it that there's Christianity and Islam? Like, how'd that happen? We've suffered at the hands of Christians and Muslims and false messiahs. I mean, he doesn't, mince his words. He said directly, why is it that we have all this? He's not a religious pluralist. He says, maybe God's ways are hidden, and maybe what they've done is they've brought the world closer to monotheism. Because once upon a time, the world was all pagans on various islands, and now that Christians and Muslims have adopted monotheism, they brought the world closer to monotheism, despite everything that we've suffered at their hands. But when the Messiah comes, when the Mashiach comes, Christianity and Islam, according to Maimonides, will go away, and there will be remaining in the world two genres of people: Jews who must observe the 613 commandments, and generic biblical non-Jews called Noachides who observe the 7 commandments. Because as Rabbi Dweck pointed out, the Rambam understood that the entire vision of the world is the Torah. The Torah has no room for other religions. It's either Judaism in the full covenant or the Noahide covenant of the 7 laws. So that's how Maimonides at least has interpreted that in the classic Sephardic sense, if that answers your question.
Yeah. To just an addendum on that, I think it's important to recognize that if we recognize our people as a nation, first and foremost, we recognize that there is a governmental system, right, that the Torah kind of presents. And when it talks about the Noahide laws, it talks about citizens under the sovereignty of the Jewish state,
Right.
and how it is that they live. And they're under that Jewish state, they are simply expected to be able to keep those seven things. So Harambam probably would not agree with going to the government of a foreign state and say, we should have them all follow. It's a system that runs within. When the Jews are sovereign and they choose to be able to follow a system that the Torah, runs, then okay, so the non-Jewish people that live in the state are simply required to be able to follow these kinds of things if they're going to be maintained in the state. So that is the contextual reality of that. Yeah, I mean, to recognize Rabbi Buskila, as far as the Torah is concerned, it doesn't celebrate idolatry in any form, but it's not really our business to deal with it when it's not within our home, right? When it's in our home, we deal with it as we have to deal with it, but not necessarily to go and convert the entire world to it. Yeah, I hope that answers. Yeah. Is there any other?
Any other? Yossi.
First of all, beautiful. But my question is, to me, the Sephardic approach and values that have carried us in our own community may not be strong enough to keep us with all the influences of the world that we have. And we're seeing generation after generation, world making as well. Not sticking to what you discussed, or I mean, both and which is how we lasted until this point.
Mm-hmm.
So really my question is how do we combine both what we discussed with ensuring that future generations not only learn about Sephardic values, but also these aspects.
Just so everyone heard the question, it's how do we continue, if I can paraphrase, continue this tradition for our children with all the influences around us? And if I may even add, there's always a question, do we force our kids to do something or let them do it on their own and find their way? And we have that conflict, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. And you're right, it's a problem, it's an issue. For me, in my understanding, it goes back to education. We have failed. And we've been failing for a long time. I'm going to say it like it is. Again, it's my opinion. You can toss it, as we say in England, in the rubbish as you leave. But this is my opinion. Having been a head of school of Barkai in New York, in which we teach this system, again, it's only empirical, but I can say to you that I see the difference. In children that are educated in terms of our halakha and tradition, given the entire 5 books of the Torah from the time that they can speak until they graduate with review, I can't properly express to you what it is that does for someone. It is a profound foundation. And when we don't have that, we are already limping. Yeah, we're already limping, and we have not had that. It wasn't taught in this city, wasn't taught in Brooklyn, wasn't taught in many, many, many places. It's not taught in Israel. I recently met with 30 heads of school districts in Israel that came to London. And my message to them was, you are failing your students because you're not teaching them the Bible. Yeah, and I told them, it's not a religious thing. This is a familial national document. This is our inheritance, and you're not teaching it to them, and that's a failure. So there is a complex response, and we can start pulling apart the social issues and the influence, so on and so forth. But I say to you that the first order of business is to educate appropriately, as we have been doing for far longer than we have not. And if we can get that intact, then we can start to think about, now what do we do, right? About how it is that we hold it and deal with it. But when it is given to a child that way, it's part of their heart, and it's not easily extricated. So that is the answer I can give you given time now. And yeah.
I'd like to just add to that, to give a local Los Angeles answer. We have a lot of Los Angelinos, people who grew up here in the community, Neil, myself, Rabbi Dweck, Yossi, others. I think we could look back on the history of this community and also say there was a failure. And it has to do with education. There was one attempt. You have people here in the room who remember trying to create a school called Sephardic Hebrew Academy, where that could have been taught. I know that today it's given the venerable name Maimonides, but there are reasons why it was changed, its name. Because it also changed its character, its curriculum, and because largely the Sephardic population didn't bite the bait. We never had a Sephardic high school. When I wanted to go study for rabbinical ordination, there was no Sephardic institution here. At best, there was some kind of loosely put together Sephardic studies program at Yeshiva University, which wasn't much of a program. So what have been the priorities of Sephardim in Los Angeles or in the United States? The Brooklyn community is probably the strongest and best example of continuity. We may not like some of the things that they're teaching and the influences that have come, but they've maintained a continuity. We have not. And I think, we have to do kind of a chashbon nefesh inside, a soul searching, and ask, why have we not invested our dollars in creating institutions or in sending our kids to institutions and influencing them? Very few Sephardim sent their kids to day schools. When I was growing up, we were a handful. So I think those are kind of I don't want to use the term the sins of the past, but the complex problems and failures of the past. And Rabbi Dweck is absolutely right. It all comes down to education. It all comes down to educating, whether we educate in Israel, through Israel trips, through seminars, through programs, through more evenings of Torah learning, without gimmicks, where we want to educate people and not just say, let's just give, simple, what I call microwavable Judaism, where, you pop it in the oven for 30 seconds and it comes out and that's all I want because I can't handle more. Like Rabbi Dweck said, we have a covenant through a text. And the moment we lose our connection to that text and our Judaism just becomes something out of context without the text, we've really lost what gives us the character as being Jews, Sephardim or Ashkenazim. It's true on both sides, but it's been especially painful that beautiful tradition, Yossi, that you asked about has been lost because we never opened institutions to transmit it, and we had to go elsewhere, all of us, in order to get what we have. And thankfully, some of us that came from homes where we had parents who can give us not only the love of the tradition and the culture, but the actual learning Torah. My Sephardic rabbi growing up was named Nisim Buskila. That's my father. The only Sephardic rabbi I knew growing up was my rabbi. Not many were blessed to have that. Where are our institutions and are tomorrow's Sephardic children going to have institutions to attend here in this city? That's a challenge.
I would maybe ask you both to give us some tools, because many of us may not have kids that are in school anymore, and we missed that train, or we sent our kids to schools that may have gotten a different type of education. So what can we study in terms of informal Jewish education, which I consider very important? This is tonight part of informal Jewish education. What tools can you give us of all ages, whether it be a reading list or maybe some top couple of books that we could look for to get us into that understanding that you brilliantly described tonight?
That's why I started the Chabura. Bottom line, that's why I did it. So thechabura.com. And what I did with that, what I've been working on with that is to do precisely that. You know, for those of us or any of us who, because I've had so many students over the years say, Rav, how do we learn what you're teaching? How do we get into? And I would say, you have to read this and read that and read this. And I finally was able to, during COVID, because everybody was online, and so I didn't have geographical partitions and difficulties. I could take teachers from all over the world and teach students all over the world. So I encourage you to have a look at that, not to plug my own thing, but you know, if you can look at that, then there is a wealth there that one can study from to be able to begin to build a framework. Yeah, I think there's a...
If I could just add to that, one of the other problems that we have, last night I had dinner at the Maimon's house with Rabbi Henkin, and we were talking about this. Ashkenazi Jews benefited from people who took the time to take the writings of great luminaries of the 20th century and translate them. We've all heard of Rabbi Soloveitchik and his work, Halachic Man. He originally wrote that in Hebrew. That was for a small audience. Lawrence Kaplan translated that into English, and it became a very popular, well-known book. Heschel wrote The Prophets in German. Somebody translated, so on and so forth. How many translations in English are there of the great Sephardic Chachamim? Don't have. Most of them went to Israel, and even their writings there were lost. And so one of the things that I've undertaken, it's very tedious work, is to try to translate some of the writings. I have many articles where I've translated several portions, and I'm trying to work on an anthology of Sephardic rabbinic texts, philosophical texts, Rabbi Uziel, Rabbi Chaim David HaLevi, Rabbi Mashash, these great Talmidei Chachamim who were great thinkers and have so much to contribute to the Jewish people. Their thought is unknown amongst Sephardim and Ashkenazim, but certainly here in the United States, it's impossible. So, but we need to have 20, 30 of us doing these sorts of things.
Yeah.
This has to become a priority of the community. I don't want to speak about some of the other priorities that I think are unfortunately capturing the community that are not priorities. They're not Jewish priorities. They may be fun for now, but they're not going to last, and we may not even be having the same conversation 20 years from now if the trend goes this way. We really actually need to sit down, like the Ashkenazim do, hire scholars who could sit and translate and bring these texts and these ideas to the Jewish world. Rabbi Dweck has done something magnificent with the Chaburat. Phenomenal.
We're publishing too.
And they're also publishing. There are books that they've published and articles. It's fabulous. We need much, much more of that so that we have libraries full of this information, not just pieces here and there.
To the point of historical teaching, we had our children, all the children, 1 or 2 years old, and you hear people, right? You can hear all of their voices reading the Torah, reading the and the women of our 1,000 years were educated in the home in a small little micro community.
Yeah.
Today, what's your answer for the girls, 2-year-old girls, to
Yeah.
it feels like they just
So I speak with respect in front of Rabbanit Henkin,
about
who
to
is
say
the
she should
authority.
answer. She should answer that.
The question was, if we're looking historically at how it is that we've taught, my uncle points out accurately that what I described was largely done with the boys, not the girls. The girls learned in the home from their mothers and grandmothers, but they also remained in the position of their mothers and grandmothers. So there was a specific paradigm. The paradigm has changed, and therefore the response has to change. Yeah. So that's why at Barkai, both the boys and the girls learned exactly the same material. Yeah, absolutely. They learned exactly the same material. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a great story. This is one of my favorite experiences of being head of school through all of my years there. So we taught a book a year of the Torah, right? So Bereshit, 1 year, Shemot. So Vayikra hit at around 4th grade. And you know, the parents would come to me when I first started that, and they said, Rabbi, you're teaching Leviticus to 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds? It's terrible. I said, what do you mean terrible? Why is it terrible? What are you talking about? There's blood and guts and all kinds of... I said, that's because you're looking at it that way. They don't look at it that way. And then I said, are they coming home unhappy? No. Let me know when they're coming home unhappy. Otherwise, they need to learn. They'll learn this. So I was in every classroom every day. But twice a year, I would have a formal observation of an entire lesson. And I and the Hebrew principal, the Jewish studies principal, would go into each club. We'd sit in a class. So the class that we happened to have been observing on this particular day was a 4th grade girls class in Vayikra, in Leviticus. What are they learning? They're learning about leprosy, right? The mitzorah, tzarat. And the process of purifying a person right after they've gone through leprosy, the process of purifying. So I'm sitting there, this is a class of 30 girls, all in Hebrew. Everything is in Hebrew, because we learn the Torah in its native language. And every question that the teacher is asking, full class of hands go up. All the girls know the answers to the thing. I'm beaming, the Jewish studies teacher is beaming. We love it, we're on cloud 9, it's phenomenal. Work is done, right? Mission accomplished. And then, at the end of the lesson, one of the girls raises her hand and says, Hamora, ma nachnu olchot lilmod machar. So, Hamora, teacher, what are we going to be learning tomorrow? And the teacher says, Nigata batib. We're going to be learning about the tzarat of the walls of the homes. And she goes, yes! That's what happens when you teach children Torah, right? From the time they're young. It's become part of them. So that's what we do, right? We have to respond. And it's what Rabbanit, if I can say, take the liberty to say, that's what Rabbanit Henkin is doing. Right. She is not just teaching Torah to women, she is educating halachic authorities, right? Women who become halachic authorities, who are teaching and establishing halakha appropriately. That certainly did not happen, right? When you know, in the historical thing, but it is happening. She's leading it, and it needs to happen. And I'm sure she could say much more about it, but in the sense of time. But the response needs to change when the paradigm changes.
I'd like to also answer that, but just with 2 quick stories. One, very personal. It was Shabbat HaChodesh this past Shabbat. I remember Shabbat HaChodesh about 10 years ago. At Harkham Hillel Hebrew Academy, they had a Shabbat Kehillah, which means it was a Shabbat where the community, the families came and had a special Shabbat Tefillah, and they actually asked all of the 8th graders to participate in preparing the Torah. And I went, my son Ilan was in 7th grade. It was actually very funny because he came home, he was the only 7th grader to participate in Torah reading because he had his bar mitzvah early. And he felt very insulted at first because he came home and he opened the letter and he said, they only gave me maftir, it's 3 psukim. He was very sad. I said, well, Ilan, next year, B'ezrat Hashem, you'll be in 8th grade. I said, by the way, what date is that Shabbat? So I looked on the calendar and I said, no, it's Ilan, it's Shabbat HaChodesh. Maftir is 20 psukim, right? All of it. But I remember that, but what I really remember from that Shabbat is that there were 7 aliyot of the parasha, and there were 7 8th grade boys who read. And I was there and they honored me with an aliyah. I happened to be given the aliyah that a certain young man named Jojo read the aliyah. And I remember when Jojo finished reading that aliyah, Jojo Fallis, I whispered in his ear, I said, I felt throughout the aliyah, if I closed my eyes, like I was at Magen David on Melrose 35, 40 years ago. That's continuity. He was taught. And our challenge is to be able to do that like you did for Jojo, for the girls, to learn the text that they could learn and participate. When I taught at Shul, I'll tell you one story of pride. I taught at Shalhevet High School from its early days. And during the first couple of years, 1993, 94, 95, we were grappling every year how to teach Talmud. Should we have advanced Talmud classes, regular Talmud classes? We were, it was trial and error. It was a brand new school. And we came up one year with a plan. We said, the only way to teach an advanced Talmud is to give an entrance exam to the advanced Talmud class. And that way you'll be able to weed out who really is not able to and who can. And they gave a test to the advanced Talmud group that wanted to study advanced Talmud. And I'm very proud to say that I have the distinct honor of having taught the first ever advanced Talmud class in the history of Shalhevet High School, 9 girls. They were the ones that passed.
Well done. And on that note, okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining us. Hopefully you'll stick around and take some questions
Really
outside.
an honor to do
This was fantastic.
Join
Amazing.
online, Hurrah.
Compassion.
Look for more classes.
Heart to
Let's
heart.
try and study more and get this message out. HABURA.com. Thanks a lot, everyone.